All right, thank you, everybody. So yes, my name is Sam Spaulding. I'm a doctoral student at the MIT Media Lab. I work in a group called the Personal Robots Group. We've heard a lot about different kinds of human-robot collaborations from some of the previous speakers, and that's a great tee-up to what the research that I'm doing for my PhD and what the research of our group is about. Whereas previous speakers have talked about the applications for humans and robots to collaborate on physical tasks, I want to try and provide a slightly different perspective on how humans and robots can interact with each other to help people live better lives, achieve personal goals, greater well-being, higher quality of life. So the kind of robots that I work on are called social robots. So these are robots that are meant to interact with people in natural, social ways, the way that humans interact with each other. So they're sensitive to human social cues, and importantly, they're sensitive to people's emotions. They try to parse and understand the way that people feel about things. So with a team of people including software engineers, machine learning scientists, mechanical and electrical engineers, psychologists and designers, we conduct research at MIT about building and establishing the principles for how to design and develop and deploy these robots in areas such as personalized educational tutoring, collaborative assembly, aging-related quality of life issues, and one thing that's, I think, maybe somewhat unique about our group is that we really place a high emphasis on actually going out and taking these robots outside of the lab and bringing them to real environments to interact with real users. So we take them to places like hospitals, schools, science fairs, even into people's homes for some amount of time. And from the very beginning, we start to engage the end user populations that we're interested in working with. If you believe, as I do, that social robots can improve people's lives, then you really need to find out, okay, what are the problems that these people are dealing with, and how can a robot kind of fit into their lives and help them solve it. You can't just develop this robot in the lab and then toss it over the wall and say, well, is it helping you? Because we've tried that and it does not go super well. So social robots, I think, are a fascinating technology, not least because they're very tightly interwoven in our sort of social and cultural relationship with technology. So, as one of the previous speakers said, we've had Greek myths talked about autonomous robots that could interact with people and do things. Frankenstein is another, popular touch point of creating these things that then perhaps grow to surpass our ability to control, all the way through to popular social robots of modern pop culture, C-3PO, R2-D2, WALL-E. These robots, they have personalities, they have thoughts, they have feelings, they have emotions, they're sensitive to other people's thoughts and feelings and emotions. And so one of the great things about social robots is that people have all these expectations, and they are really excited about, and they're really impressed by social robots. But one of the terrible things about working with social robots is that people bring all of this expectation and all of this baggage to working with them. So when we bring a robot to people, people expect it to do all the things that they've seen robots do in the movies, and to tell you the truth, the technology is not quite at that level yet. So part of what I'm hoping to do in this talk is to help separate sort of the hype from the reality, and I want to talk about the actual sort of technological development that's going on. This is very much still a research area. I think one of the previous speakers said, if you don't have a business plan, it's just an experiment. These are all experiments. We are inventing a new field and a new category of products here. But you can see some of the social robots that we've either worked with or developed directly within our lab, and some areas in which they're interacting with people. So I want to talk a little bit about what's hard and what's easy for social robots, and then where we think they can actually come into people's lives. And in particular, I'll talk about two topics, and that's as personalized tutors for language learning with kids and older adults. So one of the big challenges for social robots is perception. One of the top journals for robotics, Science Robotics, they gathered a number of senior researchers together, and they came up with a list of the grand challenges for robotics over the next few decades. And one of those challenges was social interaction. And the first thing that they mentioned in their write-up of why social interaction is worthy of being a grand challenge for robotics is that it's a very difficult perceptual problem. So right from the get-go, the sensors that you build have to be very sensitive. They need to be able to pick up on very rapid micro-expressions in people's facial expression or people's gesture. It cannot be, the difference between a smile and a smirk is, very, very subtle. And so I'll show you a clip of, this is a little bit of what our robots see. So you can see that robot up there on the right, its name is Tega, and it's interacting with the child. Actually, it's reading a storybook together. It's very cute. I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the results from these experiments, but this is what the robot sees. So the contrast is a little light here, but I don't know if you can see there's some red dots floating around on the child's face there. And you can see this is sort of a readout of what the robot is able to do. So it's able to track the child's face reasonably well. It's estimating the pose. It can estimate a little bit where the child's gaze or attention is, whether that's on the robot, whether that's on the book, whether that's somewhere off in space. And it can also parse a little bit of the expressions. So it's tracking what we call facial action units. And it can do things like tell whether, based on how those action units change, it can do things like tell whether the child is smiling, frowning, looking confused or frustrated. Over here on the right, you can see that we're also estimating the child's body pose, so from a different camera angle, from a different point of view. And that is one of the great things about robots, is that you can just throw sensors all over the place. You can estimate the child's body pose, so you can see, well, what are they doing with their hands? Are they leaning forward? Are they leaning backwards? You can even get some estimate of their shoulders or their body language. So we're taking in data from multiple streams, and we're doing what's called this multimodal sensor fusion, where we take in data from multiple modalities, different streams of information, and we need to somehow try and represent that as a cohesive whole. So it's somewhat of a difficult task. It's very new, but it doesn't stop there. As you go up the hierarchy, from perception to what you might call social cognition, things get even more complicated. So now we're not just dealing with perceptual data, we're also dealing with tracking changes in that data over time. We're dealing with things, not just facial expression, but also when we're talking to each other, what's my tone of voice like? What are the words that I'm actually saying? I'm trying to build up a complex mental model of what we call a theory of mind. So it's what you think, what I think that you think, or what I think that you think that I think. So all of these things are what humans naturally do and track and represent over the course of a social interaction. And yet, this is, the big challenge for robots is that what humans learn how to do automatically, which all of us typically developing humans do, robots have to be explicitly taught or programmed how to do this. So they can either learn from data, experience, demonstration, or they can be explicitly programmed with rules that can kind of govern the social interaction. So this is sort of the grand challenge of social robotics, which is how can we build robots that are as socially adept as humans, that are as fluent and capable of processing and understanding social information, and capable of sustaining a rich kind of social interaction with a human. So in this next part of the talk, I'll just shift over and I'll talk a little bit about kind of where I see social robots fitting in the history of technology, and a couple different application areas where we're deploying robots and some exciting results and upcoming projects that we have. So jumping right to the punchline, I see social robots as kind of the inheritors to the legacy of what's called persuasive technology. So persuasive technology is simply any technology that is designed to change or influence its users' attitudes or beliefs or behavior. So probably the most prominent figure in persuasive technology is this professor named B.J. Fogg. He's sort of seen as the father of the field. He's a professor at Stanford. He's also known as the millionaire maker because of his role in educating the inventors of apps like Instagram, Snapchat, and dozens of other apps that collectively have millions or even billions of users. And if you read his book, it's actually fascinating. It was written in 2003, but it's so prescient in how it predicted or perhaps even laid the groundwork for the modern world of technology that we live in. So the big idea, or one of the biggest ideas from this area, is the concept of the functional triad. So these are three different roles that technology can play to be persuasive, to get users to change their attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. So the first role is technology as a data fluent tool. And I think a great example of that is something like a Fitbit or a fitness tracker, where it's persuasive because it is actually doing computations that a human couldn't do itself. So it's tracking your steps, which humans don't keep track of all 10,000 steps that they take throughout the day. But a tool can. So it tracks those steps, it does some analysis on them, and it maybe displays that or visualizes that to you as a graph. And because you as a user see that information, that helps change your behavior. The second role is technology as an engaging medium. So this is a medium that engages the senses. It's often, you'll see something like this in virtual reality, an immersive simulation, or even just something like a good old run-of-the-mill game where it's engaging your senses, it's using sort of gamification principles to get you to keep playing, or as in the case of some of those therapeutic systems that we saw, to get you to keep practicing something, practicing a skill when you might not otherwise if it weren't quite so immersive. Now the third role is technology as a social actor. So it can change users' attitudes and behaviors by using methods from social influence, something that we might call charisma or salesmanship. But essentially, you can think of it as the same way that you as a person might try to persuade someone of something. Technology can adopt a social role and use some of those same tactics. So a modern instance of that might be these like chatbot kinds of systems, like on a travel website when you're booking your travel, these chatbots pop up and try to persuade you to book things in certain ways or offer you add-ons and things like that. Now, one of the things we can notice about this is that social robots can check every single one of these boxes. They can be both a data fluent tool, they can perceive and track all of this information about what you're doing. They can be an engaging medium, they're physically present, they can express themselves in emotionally and socially expressive ways. And as a social actor, they can use the same kinds of principles that humans use to try to convince people of what's going on. One last thing that I want to add to this functional triad is that social robots have a physical embodiment. So one of the things that we've seen over many, many different studies in many different application areas is that having a physical body seems to really matter. When we compare a physical robot to a virtual or an on-screen counterpart, we find that robots they produce higher learning gains, they're better at getting people to comply with a difficult or an unpleasant task, and over long periods of time, people actually form more of a bond with a physical robot compared to an on-screen robot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one topic, and that's the use of robots as a tutor for language learning with kids. So there's good evidence from social and affective neuroscience that language learning is fundamentally a very social process, and that's kind of why we picked this area. That when you're actually learning a language, and many people sort of intuitively understand this, that flashcards can only get you so far. If you really want to master a language, if you really want to learn something, you need to practice it, and you need to practice it in a conversation with another social agent. So we also know that emotions are very important for this process, that engaging someone and being able to engage them emotionally is going to help you learn and remember and retain that information long after the tutoring session is over. So this is an example of a child interacting with a robot. They're playing a learning game together. It's sort of like I Spy. We have a big scene in the background, and the tablet assigns words for the child and the robot to look for together. So in this case, the word is lavender. Is there video, or sorry, is there audio for this?
We are trying to find lavender color stuff.
So you'll see what's going on here is that the child and the robot are actually, they're
The
really
word was lavender.
engaged in this task together. It's not like a tutor-tutee relationship. It's really more like two peers learning and teaching each other together. So they're able to offer support to each other. They're able to think out loud. You can see how the presence of this robot is really leading this child to think out loud, think through her process. So you can see she kind of just got a word wrong.
Better next time. I believe in you.
The robot's able to offer a little bit of support.
Robot's turn.
Now the robot gets to
Time
take a
to
turn.
perform. Lavender is purple.
So the robot's able to provide some hints to the child
Just
in
like
real
my
time
friend
based on
does.
what it's observing.
Flower.
Okay, so I'm almost out of time, so I'll just quickly kind of close up by saying we've done a number of studies deploying these robots as language learning companions in local Boston area schools, but they've been very short-term deployments. I'm very excited to announce that coming up this fall, we're actually starting to roll these systems out in actual public schools. We have partners lined up in Boston, LA, and Atlanta, and we're going to do 3-month deployments of these robots in schools, and we'll hopefully be able to really get the data that we need to show that these robots can have a significant long-term effect on language learning above and beyond just a single session. So in closing, I hope what you'll take away from this talk is that social robots are sort of a different and unique take on how robots can impact people's lives. It's not so much about physically helping them do tasks in the world. It's really about the social, the emotional, and the motivational effects that a robot that's designed to interact with you, like a social peer, can have. And with that, I will turn it back over to...